Forget everything you think you know about Vikings. Big muscle guys in horned helmets? Wrong. Massive ships crashing onto beaches while they scream like animals? Also wrong. Viking raids weren't just some chaotic drunken brawl. They were precise, terrifying, and honestly, kind of genius. For the people living in Europe during the 8th and 9th centuries, hearing the word Vikings was like hearing your Wi-Fi is down today. Pure panic. Except instead of losing internet, you lost your house, your livestock, your entire village, and probably your head. Movies make it look like Vikings just showed up out of nowhere, axes swinging, setting everything on fire for fun. But the real story? Way more calculated, way more brutal, and somehow even more impressive. See, Viking raids weren't random. They were basically the medieval version of organized crime mixed with military strategy, with a little extra blood and body odor thrown in. So buckle up, because we're about to break down how Viking raids actually happened. Spoiler alert, it wasn't as glamorous as Hollywood thinks. From the year 793 AD, when the first major recorded raid happened at the Lindisfarne Monastery off the northeast coast of England, Viking raids became the stuff of nightmares across Europe. The monks there didn't even know what hit them. Silent longships appeared on the horizon, and within hours, the peaceful religious site was looted, burned, and its people either killed or enslaved. This raid wasn't some isolated incident. It marked the beginning of what historians now call the Viking Age, a period from roughly 793 to 1066 AD, when Scandinavian warriors, traders, and explorers set sail to reshape the known world. These early raids were so effective, they shocked even the most powerful kingdoms. Imagine you're living in a peaceful village by the sea in the year 795 AD, just 2 years after Lindisfarne. You hear strange sails on the horizon. Before you can even sound the alarm, dozens of long-haired, battle-hardened warriors storm the shore. Your wooden homes, burned. Your valuables, gone. Your neighbors, either dead or dragged onto ships, never to be seen again. But here's the thing. The Vikings weren't just reckless fighters. Their success came from incredible planning and smart technology. Let's talk about their ships for a second. Viking longships were an engineering marvel. Built from oak and designed for speed, these ships could travel through open oceans and shallow rivers alike. That meant the Vikings could strike not just coastal villages, but deep inland where no one expected them. Picture a Viking ship gliding up the Seine River in modern-day France or sneaking into the Thames near London. No medieval town was truly safe, and they didn't just attack for fun. These raids were business. Looting monasteries, farms, and towns provided wealth. Slaves were taken to be sold or put to work back home. Precious metals, livestock, even clothes were stripped away. For the Vikings, raiding wasn't chaos. It was strategy. By the early 9th century, they weren't just hitting small targets. In 841 AD, they attacked and burned parts of Dublin, Ireland, and by 845 AD, they sailed right up the River Seine and ransacked Paris. Yes, the same Paris that millions of tourists visit today. But back then, let's just say the Eiffel Tower wasn't there to hide behind. What made the Vikings so terrifying wasn't just their brute strength, it was their unpredictability. One day you'd hear stories of raids in Ireland. The next week, they'd pop up in Spain, Italy, or even North Africa. These guys had serious travel points. The more the Vikings raided, the more they learned. They adapted fast. When kings started building coastal defenses, the Vikings simply sailed up rivers. When armies waited to ambush them, the Vikings struck somewhere else. They didn't play by the traditional European war rules. They made their own. By the mid-9th century, Viking raids had evolved into full-scale invasions. In 865 AD, something big happened. A massive Viking army landed in England. Historians call it the Great Heathen Army. This wasn't a quick hit and run. This was a takeover. The Great Heathen Army was led by some of the most famous Viking leaders in history, like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson. Yes, Ivar the Boneless. Sounds strange, right? Some say he had a disease that made his bones soft. Others say he was just so fast and flexible that it looked like he had no bones. Either way, he terrified his enemies. This army didn't come just to raid. they came to stay. Town after town fell. Entire regions of England came under Viking control. They didn't just burn places anymore, they built them. They established what's known as the Danelaw, large areas in England where Viking laws, language, and culture took over. Imagine your country getting new rulers who speak a different language, eat different food, and don't even bother asking you if that's okay. And the Vikings weren't only raiding England, they were sailing further than most Europeans thought possible. They reached the Mediterranean, North Africa, and even the Middle East. By the 10th century, Vikings were trading with the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. They weren't just warriors, they were merchants too. One Viking explorer, Bjorn Ironside, famously raided down through modern-day Spain into the Mediterranean and even reached the coast of Italy. Legend says he tried to sack the city of Rome. Whether or not he actually made it into Rome is debated, but the fact that Vikings got that far is incredible. Their reach was expanding rapidly. From Russia to North Africa, from England to the Middle East, Viking raids became a global phenomenon. They weren't just local pirates, they were becoming international players. But let's clear something up. Not every Viking was a raider. The word Viking itself actually means to go on an expedition, or to raid. It wasn't their job title. It was more like a temporary activity. Most Norse people were farmers, fishermen, and traders. But when the opportunity came, they picked up their swords, axes, and shields, jumped on their ships, and became Vikings. And honestly, the people they targeted had no idea how to deal with them at first. European kingdoms weren't prepared for fast-moving hit-and-run attacks. Their armies were slow, their castles weren't designed to stop ships from sailing right into their towns, and their rulers were often arguing amongst themselves. The Vikings took full advantage. By the early 10th century, they had raided so many places that some kingdoms started paying them to leave. These payments were called Danegeld. Imagine being so dangerous that kings would rather hand over bags of silver than fight you. That's exactly what happened. The Vikings got rich without lifting a sword, just by threatening to. But of course, not every Viking raid was successful. There were disasters too. In 1000 AD, a Viking leader named Leif Erikson sailed west from Greenland and reached what we now call North America over 500 years before Columbus. His settlement, known as Vinland, didn't last. The native peoples fought back fiercely, and the Vikings eventually abandoned the idea. But still, they made it across the Atlantic long before most Europeans dreamed it was possible. Back in Europe, Viking raids kept evolving. By the 11th century, they were no longer just pirates. Some of them became kings. The most famous example, William the Conqueror, descendant of Viking settlers in Normandy, France. In 1066 AD, he invaded England and became king, ending the Anglo-Saxon rule. That same year is considered the official end of the Viking Age. But make no mistake, their legacy didn't end there. From warfare to trade routes, language to genetics, the impact of the Viking raids shaped Europe for centuries. But how exactly did these Viking raids unfold step by step? Let's break it down. First came the planning. Viking chieftains didn't just wake up one morning and decide to raid, they gathered intelligence. Through traders, travelers, and even spies, they learned which towns were wealthy, which monasteries were poorly defended, and which rivers could carry their ships deep into enemy territory. Once a target was chosen, the ships were prepared. Viking longships were the heart of every raid. These weren't clunky, slow-moving boats. They were sleek, fast, and could sail in shallow waters, giving the Vikings access to almost any coastal or riverside settlement. A standard longship could carry 40 to 60 men, and some of the larger ones carried over 100 warriors. Next came the departure, usually under the cover of darkness or early morning fog. The element of surprise was everything. Imagine a quiet village, farmers working in the fields, children playing by the shore. Suddenly, strange sails appear on the horizon. Within minutes, heavily armed warriors storm the beach. The first targets? Churches and monasteries. These weren't just religious centers, they were banks. Monasteries often stored gold, silver, jewelry, and books worth a fortune. Plus, they had little to no defenses. The raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD proved how easy it was to strike such places. After looting the churches, the Vikings moved on to the towns. They took whatever they could: livestock, food, weapons, valuables. And anyone who resisted faced brutal consequences. Sometimes they'd burn the town to the ground to send a message. Other times, they'd leave it standing knowing they could come back for more. But it wasn't all bloodshed. Vikings were opportunists. If a town surrendered or paid them off, they often spared the people and moved on. Why waste energy fighting when you can get rich without lifting a sword? Once the loot was secured, the Vikings would retreat just as quickly as they arrived, vanishing back into the sea. Their ships allowed them to disappear before any real military response could be organized. But not all raids ended with a quick getaway. Over time, many Vikings stayed. They established permanent settlements, especially in England, Ireland, and parts of France. Places like York, known to the Vikings as Jorvik, became major Viking strongholds with markets, workshops, and thriving communities. By settling down, the Vikings weren't just raiders anymore. They were rulers, farmers, traders, and craftsmen. Their culture began mixing with the local populations, leaving a lasting imprint on language, art, and traditions. But settling in foreign lands didn't mean the Viking raids stopped. In fact, for some regions, the presence of Viking settlements made things even worse. These settlements became launching pads for even more ambitious attacks, especially across England, Ireland, and parts of continental Europe. Take Ireland, for example. By the early 9th century, Vikings had established fortified bases known as long forts along the coasts and rivers. These weren't just simple camps. They were strategic military and trading hubs. From places like Dublin, founded by Vikings around 841 AD, they could raid inland with ease, control trade routes, and exert political influence. And the Vikings didn't just target peasants or small villages. They went after major cities, royal treasuries, and even kings themselves. In 845 AD, a legendary Viking chieftain named Ragnar Lodbrok, or at least someone claiming to be him, led a fleet of ships up the River Seine and attacked Paris. The Frankish king, Charles the Bald, was so desperate to protect his people that he paid the Vikings a massive ransom to leave. This wasn't a one-time deal. Over the next decades, similar payments were made across Europe, as rulers realized fighting the Vikings often cost more than simply paying them off. But here's the genius part. The Vikings weren't just relying on brute force. They were master negotiators, traders, and navigators. Their reputation for violence made their trade offers hard to refuse. Imagine a Viking trader showing up at your market offering fine furs, silver, and exotic goods, with a polite reminder that refusal could bring his heavily armed friends to your doorstep. And it wasn't just Europe that felt the Viking impact. Their longships carried them deep into what is now Russia, along the rivers like the Volga and Dnieper. There, Norse adventurers known as the Varangians established trade routes connecting the Baltic Sea to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. They founded key cities, including Novgorod and later Kiev, shaping the future of Eastern Europe. Some even served as elite bodyguards for the Byzantine emperors. Known as the Varangian Guard, these Viking warriors were feared and respected across Constantinople. Their presence in the grand palaces of Byzantium is a testament to how far the Vikings had traveled, and how deeply they had embedded themselves in world affairs. By the 11th century, Viking influence stretched from the coast of North America to the heart of the Middle East. They weren't just raiders anymore. They were explorers, traders, mercenaries, and kings. But like all great eras, the Viking Age eventually came to an end. By the late 11th century, Europe had changed. Kings had learned from their mistakes. Coastal defenses improved. Fortified towns and castles made sudden Viking raids more difficult. Armies were better organized, and navies were built to patrol the seas and rivers. At the same time, many Vikings themselves were changing. They weren't just raiders anymore. They were settlers, farmers, merchants, and rulers. Many converted to Christianity, which connected them to the rest of Europe politically and culturally. With shared religion came treaties, alliances, and new ways of doing business. The most symbolic moment marking the end of the Viking Age was the year 1066 AD. That's when Harald Hardrada, the king of Norway and one of the last great Viking warriors, led an invasion of England. His forces were fierce, experienced, and battle-hardened. But at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the English army under King Harold Godwinson defeated the Vikings in a brutal clash. It was the last major Viking invasion of England, and it ended in failure. Harald Hardrada was killed, and his dream of Viking domination in England died with him. Ironically, just weeks later, another invasion arrived from across the sea, this time led by William the Conqueror, a descendant of Vikings who had settled in Normandy, France. His victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 AD changed English history forever. It also showed how much the Vikings had transformed, from seafaring raiders to kings and conquerors shaping the future of Europe. The Viking raids may have ended, but their legacy never faded. Today, traces of the Vikings are everywhere, from words in our language like berserk and Thursday, named after Thor, to place names across England, Scotland, and Ireland. Their bloodlines run through millions of people, and their daring spirit lives on in our fascination with exploration, adventure, and the unknown. So the next time you picture a Viking raid, forget the Hollywood nonsense. No horned helmets, no mindless chaos. Just cold, calculated, strategic warriors sailing across the seas, reshaping the world one raid at a time. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more untold Viking stories coming your way.